I cannot hear this parable that Jesus told without remembering one of the first weddings I ever did. I was a very young minister. I was just starting out. I was still in my 30s. This wedding was supposed to start at 7 p.m., but it didn't start until after 8 o'clock. It didn't start till after the musicians had played their prelude music 5 times over and were threatening to walk out of the church. The people in the pews were restless, grumbling, some of them pacing the aisles. It was just terrible. And I'll tell you why. Because at 6:45, when I went to the bride's room to check on the bride to be sure that we were all systems go, I found her in a major meltdown, dissolved in tears, refusing to go down the aisle. Why? Not because she changed her mind, but because she'd forgotten to bring her great-grandmother's garter. And she was determined to have, as the old Puritan tradition goes, to have something old. You know how it goes? Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. And she had left her something old on her dresser at home, which is 30 minutes away from the church. And she refused to get married unless she had that garter. Well, God bless him, one heroic usher zoomed into action. He jumped into his car. He drove 100 miles an hour. He ran through every red light to fetch that garter and come screeching back in the parking lot and victoriously into the bride's room, clutching that garter in his right hand. And the wedding was underway. I tell you what, I never let that happen again. I have done literally hundreds and hundreds of weddings, but from that day forward, they always started on time, and they always will, take note, with or without your garters. But on that day, that young bride was convinced that she could not enter something new like a marriage without something old. You know, there's a whole lot of truth in that, not just about weddings and marriages, but there's a lot of truth in that about life itself. Through all the transitions that we go through, we need both change and continuity. We need both the wisdom of the past as well as the freshness of the future. Jesus is telling us that this is how it is in the kingdom of heaven, life as God intended it. We treasure both old and new. This is important because you know he was accused of trashing the traditions. He was accused by his enemies of playing fast and loose with all the old religious rules that were inscribed in stone on the books. Who was this young radical, they wanted to know, who's trying to change everything overnight? But Jesus made it absolutely clear that his intent was not to trash the traditions. He said, don't think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've not come to abolish them. I've come to fulfill them. Later, the Apostle Paul would write, the fulfillment of the law is what? Love. The fulfillment of the law is love. For Jesus and for Paul alike, it was never a forced choice between law and love. It was always both. And yet, even in the church, some of the most heated debates I've ever been a part of had to do with a conflict between old and new. Half the people saying, well, we never did it this way before, and the other half saying, but it's about time. I think I've told you before about that first little church I served, fresh out of seminary, down on the New River Bayou, a little white frame church, divided into 2 factions. I can still picture those 2 factions. On my right were all the old-timers, the ones who had founded the church, the ones who paid the bills, the ones who ruled the church council, the ones who made sure the grass was cut every week. And then over here on my right was this big batch of newcomers, this huge family with about 10 kids and all their cousins, this loud, messy, fun-loving bunch who were full of all these new ideas about let's have a church fair and let's have a softball team. And they sat on opposite sides as if there was this invisible brick wall down the center aisle, and would even refuse to come to communion at the same time. First this side would come to the chancel. When they were done, and only then would this side come to the chancel. What was I to do? Who was I going to support? Who would I love more? I tell you, I steadfastly refused to take sides. I joined the softball team. I played shortstop for 3 years, never missed a game, and I visited those old-timers and sat in their living rooms and drank their demi-tasse coffees of that black, bitter chicory coffee and listened to them tell me about the history of their little church. I found a way to love them both, the old-timers and the newcomers. I would listen to them gripe about each other, but I would not participate. I just kept loving them because I wanted them to know it was not a matter of either or, old, new, right, wrong, win, lose. Not in the kingdom of heaven, where we treasure both. And when we find a way to treasure both, it's a win-win situation. There's a famous poem by the great poet Rumi. It begins with this verse. Listen closely. He says, "Out beyond our ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there," he says. In other words, beyond my turf and your turf, there's a broad, spacious, common ground on which we can all stand, and it gives us a vantage point from which we can see new possibilities that we never imagined before. It's a higher ground. In politics, it's called the third way, beyond the two parties, beyond the extremes, beyond right and left, that seeks to build bridges of understanding. The Buddhists call it the middle way. And in Methodism, like Episcopalianism, it's called the Via Media. It's Latin. It means the middle way. That's what we represent in our denomination because of our love of both tradition and innovation. It's truly a wedding of something old and something new. Remember Steven Spielberg's brilliant movie, Lincoln? It focuses upon this great president's monumental efforts to pass the 13th Amendment, which would end slavery for all time and usher in a new era for both the North and the South. And he was up against immense opposition from those who thought it was just too much, too fast, too new, too radical. But what was it that was guiding him into this brave new world? It was something old. It was the old, timeless principle established by our founding fathers. How does it go? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. An old principle, a new law. It was a wedding of both something old and something new. That's why the key word in this parable is not old, and the key word in this parable is not new, and the key word in this parable is not even the word treasure. The key word in this parable is that seemingly insignificant, humble little word, and. It is the cure for our dualistic mindset that wants to divide the whole world into them and us and right and wrong and old and new. Richard Rohr, my favorite theologian, calls it the shining word and. The shining word and, which helps us to find the way beyond either your way or their way or my way to a third way, a higher way. There's always that third way. We may not see it at first, but we can count on it. So says Stephen Covey in his book entitled The Third Alternative. He asks, how do we get to it? How do we find it? And his answer is this: you have to listen. We have to listen to one another. We have to seek understanding and build bridges. We have to appreciate diversity, not just tolerate diverse opinions. That's not good enough. We have to value diverse opinions. We have to, as Jesus put it, treasure them. Only then can your way and my way lead us to a higher way, that whole new possibility that we never before imagined, probably something we can all get behind. You know, this is why we have an Old Testament and a New Testament. I've known people who wanted to trash the Old Testament. They didn't understand it was too violent. They just didn't want it anymore. Let's just stick with the New Testament. No, the Old Testament was Jesus' Bible. That's all he had at that time was the Torah. And there's no way to understand Jesus without seeking understanding of the Old Testament. And the New Testament, the lens of love through which we must interpret all of the old. We need both, old and new. This is why the Lord's Supper is not just a memorial meal of something that happened 2,000 years ago. It is that, a remembrance for sure, but it is also a celebration of his living presence with us here and now, both old and new. This is why we have in our pews not only the standard Methodist hymnal with all the standard Methodist hymns, but also that old Cokesbury hymnal with those oldies but goodies, Whispering Hope and Ivory Palaces. And pretty soon, because of your generosity, we're going to have the Faith We Sing, that supplement to the hymnal that's just filled with new songs that I think you will enjoy as much as I do. Let it be a wedding of both something old and something new. I remember once when my children, Luke and Sarah, were just in middle school, and we were going to the beach. We were on our way, and you would think that we would have been happy as larks on our way to a vacation at the ocean, but they were fighting, and it was miserable. And what were they fighting over? Music. What were we going to listen to on the CD player for those hours on the highway? For Luke, it had to be classical, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, something like that. For Sarah, no way did she want to listen to all that old stuff. She wanted to hear hard rock. She wanted to hear Smashing Pumpkins and Cake and Pearl Jam. And me, I just wanted a little peace and quiet. What were we to do? I mean, we could have compromised. I could have agreed to let them each listen to half the time to their music and be miserable for the other half of the time, win, lose. But we worked on it, and we found a better way. We found that third, higher way. We settled on neither classical nor hard rock, but on Phantom of the Opera. It was fairly new at that time. We all loved it, and that's what we did. We sang that music we loved together at the top of our lungs all the way to Gulf Shores, Alabama. There is always that third way if we're willing to listen, willing to seek understanding, willing to build bridges. That third way, it is the higher way. You know, I think I know the name of that higher way. Could it be the way that he taught us? Could it possibly be the way to which he still calls us? Could it be his way of love? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Stand and sing with me now.